Section 1. The Scraps of Victory, March 7, 1942. The steamy, mosquito-ridden jungle floor of Bandoeng, Java, Netherlands, East Indies. The air is thick with the smell of smoke, tropical rot, and the sharp tang of defeat. Just days ago, the Dutch garrison here surrendered to the advancing Japanese Imperial Army, bringing the entire island under Tokyo's control. Captain Joseph Rochefort, though thousands of miles away at Station HIPO in Pearl Harbor, feels the reverberations of this catastrophe. Yet, as the Allied troops are marched into captivity, a different kind of prize is being hunted by a handful of beleaguered U.S. Navy cryptologists. Chief Warrant Officer Frank B. Rowlett, a tall, intense man with a relentless focus, moves through the abandoned headquarters of the Royal Netherlands Navy like a grave robber. His mission, issued in frantic fragments over radio before the surrender, is simple: destroy everything, or recover anything, related to the enemy's codes. The Japanese, specifically the dreaded Kido Butai, 1st Air Fleet, are now unstoppable, seizing oil fields and strategic islands at a terrifying pace. The U.S. Navy's cryptology team, designated OP-20G in Washington and known locally as HIPO in Hawaii, desperately needs insight into the enemy's plans to slow the tide. Rowlett's team works by the frantic flicker of a kerosene lamp, the jungle noises pressing in on the fragile safety of the room. They find little of immediate value. The Dutch, trained to destroy their own cipher machines and documents, were thorough. Then, Sub-Lieutenant Robert H. Schliemann, a wiry young linguist, points to a pile of refuse near a shattered mahogany desk. They are not looking for codes, but for the remnants of a machine. Hidden beneath a pile of charred paper and broken furniture, Rowlett's hands close around something heavy, rectangular, and metallic. A small, portable, 9-rotor Japanese naval cipher machine. It is a Type 91 Seisakugata Injiki, a Japanese device used for auxiliary communication, a precursor to the primary complex Type 97 cipher machine, the Angoki B, which the Americans knew by the code name J-code or Roku, Japanese word for 6. This small, seemingly insignificant device is a direct link to the Imperial Japanese Navy's communication structure, its circuitry and operational architecture a mirror to the larger systems. Rowlett and Schliemann dismantle the machine immediately, photographing the rotors, noting the wiring, and sketching the inner mechanisms by hand. They meticulously pack the pieces into a canvas satchel, knowing the enemy patrols are only blocks away. This piece of hardware, combined with the earlier intelligence harvested from the captured USS Pillsbury and the Japanese flagship Akagi's salvage, now provided a critical third leg to the stool of American cryptanalysis. The technical specifications of this low-level cipher machine held the DNA of the high-level operational code. It confirmed hypotheses and suggested pathways into the impossible-to-break Angoki B. Rowlett's escape from Java is a blur of near misses, commandeered transports, and sheer luck. He carries the heavy satchel like a religious relic. The next stop, Pearl Harbor, the humid basement of the administration building known as the Dungeon, and the demanding, obsessive mind of Captain Joseph J. Rochefort. The stakes were astronomical. If they could not break the J-code, the U.S. Pacific Fleet, still reeling from December 7th, would be fighting blind. The Codebreaker who never spoke, the J-code machine itself, was finally on its way to revealing its secrets, thanks to the scraps of victory salvaged from the ashes of defeat. Section 2. The Dungeon and the Human Machine. April 1st, 1942. The Dungeon, a windowless, airless sub-basement of the 14th Naval District Headquarters in Pearl Harbor, territory of Hawaii. The atmosphere in Station HIPO is electric, fueled by coffee and desperation. Captain Joseph J. Rochefort, a compact man whose eyes seemed to miss nothing, oversaw the operation. His team, a strange mix of brilliant mathematicians, crossword puzzle champions, and highly trained Japanese language officers, worked in shifts around the clock. The captured cipher machine, delivered personally by Rowlett, now sat disassembled on a heavy wooden workbench, examined piece by piece. The challenge was not breaking the Type 97 cipher machine itself. The Americans had already reverse-engineered its principle and created a facsimile, codenamed Magic. The challenge was the J-code key settings, which the Japanese changed frequently and erratically. The Type 97, known to the Imperial Navy as Angoki B, was a fiendishly complex electromechanical device that utilized multiple rotors and a stepping mechanism to generate a polyalphabetic substitution cipher. Cracking the machine was only the beginning. Cracking the daily settings, the rotor order, plug board settings, and starting positions, was the perpetual, exhausting task. Rochefort's approach was radical, bordering on heresy to the Washington Codebreakers of OP-20G. While Washington favored brute force mathematical attacks against the raw ciphertext. The ciphertext. Rochefort insisted on fusing cryptology with traffic analysis and linguistic intuition. He believed the Japanese Navy was a product of a predictable, bureaucratic culture. He wanted to know who was talking to whom, when they were talking, and how long the messages were. The Codebreakers, notably Lieutenant Commander Thomas H. Dyer, meticulously analyzed the preamble and ending of thousands of intercepted Japanese radio messages. The message preambles contained critical, unencrypted information: the sender's unit, the time of transmission, and the destination. By cross-referencing this data with intelligence reports, they began building a psychological profile of the enemy. If the carrier Division 5 suddenly sent 30 messages in rapid succession to a land base in the Marshall Islands, it didn't take a genius to know something big was happening in that area. A critical breakthrough came from the tedious analysis of Japanese weather reports, which were often encrypted using the J-code. These messages were short, highly structured, and predictable, making them a source of known cribs, plaintext segments that could be leveraged to deduce the corresponding ciphertext. A codebreaker named Joseph Finnegan, sitting at a desk surrounded by tall stacks of flimsy paper, finally discerned a pattern in the way the Japanese operators were signing off. It was a subtle, almost rhythmic quirk in the final 5 letters of many messages, a sort of operator's signature in the code that offered a sliver of known plaintext. With these human-derived insights, the traffic patterns, the operator ticks, the captured hardware's logic, and the weather cribs, the human machine of hypo began to run. On April 14, 1942, they hit a major key setting, and the machine, the Type 97, finally began to sing, translating streams of previously unintelligible Japanese into plain English. The first clear message revealed the massive scale of the Japanese shipbuilding efforts and confirmed the enemy's focus was still on the South Pacific. But where would they strike next? The decrypted texts spoke only of an objective designated AF. The fate of the Pacific hung on identifying this 2-letter cipher. Section 3. The Deception of AF. May 12, 1942. Station HIPO, Pearl Harbor. The air conditioning unit strains uselessly against the humid heat of the dungeon, adding a dull rhythmic thrum to the silence of intense concentration. The key to the J-code was yielding daily messages, yet the most critical information, the target designated AF, remained stubbornly opaque. Washington's Cryptology Command, OP-20G, was convinced that AF referred to a location in the Aleutian Islands, possibly Dutch Harbor. Intelligence intercepts from the Imperial Japanese Army, IJA, used the designation AO for the Aleutians, strengthening Washington's belief. If the primary carrier strike, the Kido Butai, hit the frigid north, the U.S. Pacific Fleet under Admiral Chester W. Nimitz would be dangerously split. But Captain Rochefort, leaning on his team's superior traffic analysis and linguistic immersion, was skeptical. His codebreakers noted that the concentration of intercepted messages involving AF originated primarily from bases in the Marshalls and the Carolines, islands that pointed due east, directly toward Hawaii. The volume of aircraft and logistical supply traffic directed toward AF suggested a major fleet action, too ambitious and geographically isolated for a mere feint in the Aleutians. Furthermore, Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, a civilian engineer turned naval cryptologist, pointed out that the entire strategic structure of the Japanese plan, the movement of troop transports and landing forces, suggested a desire to establish a permanent forward operating base, not just a northern distraction. Rochefort, bypassing the cautious bureaucracy of Washington, took a tremendous risk, presenting his theory directly to Admiral Nimitz. "Sir, we believe AF is midway," he stated, his voice quiet but firm. "It is the only logical staging point that justifies this level of preparation." Midway Atoll, a vital refueling and surveillance post just over 1,000 miles northwest of Oahu, was the cork in the bottle protecting Pearl Harbor. If Midway fell, Hawaii was next. Nimitz, who trusted Rochefort's gut instincts over the mathematical rigidity of OP-20G, authorized a dangerous deception plan devised by Holmes. The U.S. base commander at Midway was instructed to send a clear text radio message, meaning unencrypted, to Pearl Harbor, reporting a critical emergency. The island's primary freshwater distillation plant had broken down, and the base was facing a severe water shortage. The team at Station Haipio waited. For hours, the dungeon was silent, save for the rapid clicking of the IBM punch card machines used for code testing. Then, less than 24 hours later, the machine gave up a message that sliced through the geopolitical fog of war. The J code, freshly translated, contained a stunning confirmation. AF is suffering from a water shortage. Early attack is desired. The codebreaker who never spoke had been tricked into giving up the secret. Intercepted message, decoded by Lieutenant Commander Joseph A. Carroll, proved that the Japanese cryptographers, in their haste, had unwittingly sent out a vital internal report concerning their target. The target was confirmed. Midway. Nimitz now had the 5 most critical words of the entire Pacific War. The entire Pacific Fleet was immediately ordered to converge near Midway, setting the stage for the greatest naval ambush in history. Section 4. The Quiet War of the Airwaves. May 28, 1942. The seas northwest of Pearl Harbor. The American carrier task forces, Task Force 16, under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, and Task Force 17, under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, are steaming toward a point northeast of Midway, known to them only as Point Luck. This rendezvous was predicated entirely on the fragile, almost unbelievable intelligence provided by Station Haipio. If Rochefort was wrong, the entire remaining U.S. Pacific Fleet would be caught flat-footed by the massive, concentrated power of the Japanese Kido Butai. 4 heavy fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. While the carriers repositioned, the cryptologists fought a quieter, equally crucial war. They had the general location, but they desperately needed the precise time and composition of the enemy fleet. The Japanese operational security had tightened considerably since the Coral Sea losses, and the J code was becoming more difficult to exploit. The communications traffic leading up to the expected engagement was dense, a confusing snarl of radio signals that had to be untangled and analyzed in real time. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes, now focused entirely on traffic analysis, noted an ominous silence from the Nagumo carrier force. The Japanese commanders, aware they were entering enemy waters, had imposed strict radio silence. The silence itself was a tactical confirmation of their approach. However, the accompanying invasion transport force and the Aleutian diversionary force were still communicating, and their transmissions provided the necessary echoes. By mapping the bearings of the lower priority signals, the supply ships, and the land-based air units, the Chaipio team could triangulate the general path of the silent carrier group, essentially tracking the ghost by watching its shadows. The team noticed a distinct pulse in the communications emanating from Japan's western ports, an increase in messages related to fuel consumption and stores loading for heavy vessels. This, combined with the decoded call signs of the primary screening vessels, allowed Chaipio to deliver a critical update to Nimitz on May 30th. The Japanese carriers would likely be positioned 325 nautical miles northwest of Midway, and their attack would commence on the morning of June 4th. This real-time, 3-day warning was unprecedented. It gave the U.S. forces the priceless asset of strategic surprise. Instead of being forced into a desperate reactive defense, the American carriers were able to deploy their forces to strike the Japanese while they were most vulnerable. In the midst of cycling their aircraft between land attacks on Midway and preparing for an expected naval engagement, Captain Rochefort, chain-smoking Pall Malls in the stifling heat of the dungeon, knew the human element was the ultimate key. The codebreaker who never spoke, the J-code, had given them the location and the time. Now it was up to the pilots and sailors at sea to execute the strategy. But even as the American fleet steamed into position, a chilling possibility remained. What if the Japanese had anticipated the code being broken and had prepared an elaborate counter-ambush? The silence from the main enemy fleet was deafening and unnerving. Section 5. The Eavesdroppers of the North, June 3, 1942. Midway Atoll. The low hum of generators and the anxious anticipation of an island preparing for invasion hang in the humid air. While the carriers repositioned, the small detachment of cryptologists stationed on Midway itself, known as Station M, played their own vital role in the final hours before the battle. They were the primary eavesdroppers, the listening post that would confirm the enemy's final, close-range movements. The long-range intercepts from Pearl Harbor provided the strategic picture. But the small, directional high-frequency radio sets, HFADF or Huff Duff, on Midway provided the tactical reality. Chief Radio Man Homer T. Keiss and his small team huddled over their equipment, trying to pierce the Japanese radio silence. They focused not on deciphering the J-code, which was impossible with their limited equipment, but on tracking the faint, inevitable radio noise that accompanied a massive fleet movement. Even a disciplined Japanese naval force could not maintain absolute silence when organizing hundreds of aircraft and dozens of ships. There would be short, burst transmissions, quick acknowledgments, and crucially, the chatter of supporting air wings practicing and communicating. At 0900 local time, a patrol plane from Midway, a lumbering PBY Catalina, spotted the first wave of the Japanese transport force, the invasion fleet itself, approximately 700 miles west of the atoll. The pilot's sighting report, flashed back to Pearl Harbor, was the first physical confirmation that Station Haipio's intelligence was flawlessly accurate. More vital information followed. The Huff Duff operators on Midway began picking up strong, continuous radio direction finding bearings. These bearings, tracing back to the silent, unseen Kido-butai, showed the Japanese carrier force was executing its planned approach from the northwest. The transmissions were too short to intercept, but the direction they came from was all that mattered. Keiss's team relayed the precise bearings to Pearl, where they were immediately cross-referenced with the predictive models built by Rochefort's traffic analysts. As the morning of June 4th dawned, the final crucial intercept came not from the complex J code, but from a different, lower-level administrative cipher used by the Japanese Air Forces. Lieutenant, junior grade, William S. Martin in the dungeon managed to break a fragment of an encrypted report concerning the readiness of the Japanese carrier aircraft. The decoded message spoke of the planes being armed with land bombs for a second strike on the Midway airfields, instead of the anti-ship torpedoes required for naval combat. This meant the Japanese carriers, preparing for a subsequent land attack on the island, were momentarily caught with their decks full of improperly armed and fueled planes. A window of extreme vulnerability. The final warning, relayed instantaneously by Nimitz's staff to the American carrier commanders Spruance and Fletcher, was the last piece of intelligence required. The Japanese were oblivious to the proximity of the American carriers and dangerously unprepared for a naval engagement. The codebreaker who never spoke had not only revealed the target, but had also betrayed the enemy's critical, fatal moment of weakness. The ambush was now perfectly set. Section 6, The Unspoken Vindication, June 4th, 1942. 10:24 a.m., 300 miles northwest of Midway. The Battle of Midway is in full, terrifying swing. Dive bombers from the USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown plunge through the broken clouds, their pilots sighting the vast, unmistakable shapes of the Japanese carriers below. The codebreaker's intelligence is being paid for in blood and aviation fuel. The American aviators arrived at the exact moment. The four primary carriers of the Kido Butai, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were in the throes of the critical rearming phase. Decks were cluttered with fueled and armed aircraft. Bombs and torpedoes lay scattered, and aviation fuel lines snaked across the hangar bays. The resulting devastation is instantaneous and catastrophic. Within minutes, the Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu are struck by multiple bombs. The fires spread rapidly, fueled by the exposed ordnance and aviation gas, turning the massive carriers into towering, uncontrollable infernos. The silence of the Japanese radio waves, which had so unnerved the American commanders, was now broken only by frantic, desperate damage reports. Reports that were immediately scooped up by the distant, tireless ears of Station HIPO. Back in the stifling heat of the dungeon at Pearl Harbor, the cryptologists listened to the roar of distant combat via the radio operators. The messages coming from the surviving Japanese units are fragmented, coded, and now deeply saturated with panic and chaos. Lieutenant Commander Joseph A. Carroll and his team pieced together the fractured transmissions. Call signs are dropped, units fail to report, and the code text is laced with non-standard, abbreviated phrases that confirm disaster. They intercept a terse message from Admiral Chuichi Nagumo reporting the complete destruction of 3 of his carriers. Admiral Nimitz, receiving the summary from Rochefort, waits anxiously for the final outcome. Though the Yorktown has been mortally wounded, sunk by retaliatory strikes from the last surviving carrier, Hiryu, the strategic victory is already absolute. The Kido Butai, the core of Japan's offensive naval power, is destroyed. The decryption of AF into Midway had not merely helped win a battle. It had fundamentally shifted the course of the entire Pacific War, moving the U.S. Navy from a reactive defense to an aggressive, offensive stance. Yet, Captain Joseph Rochefort, the man whose unconventional genius and trust in his team's intuition saved the Pacific Fleet, would never receive an immediate medal, nor would his role in the victory be widely known for decades. The intense secrecy surrounding magic, the overall code name for high-level Japanese code decryption, meant his success was his professional prison. He was ordered to maintain a facade of ignorance, never discussing the intercepts, never taking credit. He continued to toil in the dungeon, chain-smoking and translating the shattered enemy messages that now confirmed Japan's profound defeat. The codebreaker who never spoke, the invisible machine of intelligence, had delivered the victory. Rochefort, the human machine, was left to guard the secret, his triumph measured only by the changing tide of the war maps on his wall.